a greener path for shared mobility? Question mark? Yeah, up there. And for that, we have 2 speakers today. So they're going to do some back-to-back talks. What we're going to do is each of them is going to speak for about 25 minutes. We might have some clarifying questions, but what we're going to do is then we'll save about 25 minutes for discussion at the end. Okay? So that's how we will do it. Oh, also, we're having lots of events today. So there's an event in the next room starting at 12:30. So they're going to be a lineup here that said when we end class, if you go out this way, that would be great. Okay, so our first speaker is Kristen Pawling. She is the Los Angeles Urban Solutions Coordinator for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Here in LA, she fights climate change by working to better integrate transportation in land use planning. Prior to joining NRDC, Kristen managed a comprehensive habitat land planning effort and crafted sustainable community strategies that many of you might be familiar with for the Southern California Association of Governments. Before that, she worked in the Schwarzenegger and Brown administrations implementing California's sustainable community law. Oops, I turned my phone down, just a reminder for everyone. I got to know Kristen in an undergraduate class I taught when she was working on her bachelor's degree right here at UCLA in Geography and Environmental Studies. I got to know her a bit better when she was in our program completing her Master of Urban Regional Planning degree in the Westman School. So she'll be speaking to us today on how sharing can improve mobility in the environment. Please join me in welcoming Kristen Pawling.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for inviting me, UCLA, Lewis Center. And I'm excited to be back here. I like to find myself back here a lot. I am a proud Bruin. Both my parents went to UCLA. We're all excited about the football game this weekend. So always happy to come back to campus. And this will be my first time sort of speaking for a group in my new role in the Natural Resources Defense Council. I've been at the Natural Resources Defense Council for about 7 months now. And like Brian described, I was previously in government. So I kind of have a wonky perspective, like more than you might find from an advocate on some of these issues. So that's my background. I'm going to talk about this green path for shared mobility in this sort of three and a half buckets of what do we know, what do we not know, and what should we find out. But I'm going to preface that with goals and talk a little bit about goals. I was talking to Kenzie, a former NRDC staff person, about, I kind of come at this from a public policy lens. I come at urban planning from a policy lens, and made friends with a lot of public policy students when I was a graduate student here. So I like thinking about the policy frame, and then we'll get into that. And then there's a lot of different kinds of goals. I list here local, regional, state, national, global. The public sector, private sector is now putting goals out on shared mobility, advocacy groups, and you can go on and on. So I'll just start with the private sector's perspective, and this wasn't a quote from yesterday, but a lot of these types of discussions were happening yesterday at the LA Auto Show, which I didn't attend, but I was following on Twitter, and it's a totally different LA Auto Show than 5 years ago, even. It's a really different scene. So Bill Ford, the chairman of Ford Motor Company, said we're going to hit the limits of our ability to provide mobility unless we adopt a very different profile going forward. And he's been speaking about mobility in a different frame for several years now. So that's just one sort of lens from a giant OEM, like a big manufacturer of vehicles, that their model has been pretty straightforward. There hasn't been a lot of innovation in transportation from his sector in a long while, but they're recognizing that something's changing, and they, from a business perspective, want to be part of that scene. Natural Resources Defense Council, especially the Los Angeles office, has been focused on criteria air pollution since its inception. And we're in the South Coast Air Quality Basin, and if have delved into the relationship between planning and transportation planning and air quality, I'm sure you'll do that in some depth. And so it's a serious issue for Southern California. So this is just a chart of our ozone standard, and we've made a lot of progress in Southern California. We have federal Clean Air Act to comply with, and that it's been steadily decreasing since the 70s, and there was higher charts earlier. So we've been making progress, but this is sort of the low-hanging fruit. It's getting harder and harder to achieve as we get down to meeting this standard. So it's a good picture, but it requires more complicated answers to meeting these. So I want to set that frame for. I mean, you can see we've made a lot of progress, but it's harder to meet that last bit of progress. And then there's climate change, which is, like Brian explained, my focus area. We are just celebrating the 10-year anniversary of AB 32. I'm sure you're all aware of what AB 32 is, and we're celebrating the recent passage of SB 32, which is setting 2030 climate goals to keep us as a state on target to meeting 2050 climate goals. And the picture was, I meant to put both pictures of the signing of AB 32 with Governor Schwarzenegger and the team that were around him 10 years ago signing that bill, and the team surrounding Jerry Brown in Los Angeles signing SB 32. It's really different, the players involved. Also, we signed AB 197 by Eduardo Garcia. He's a new legislator from the Coachella Valley, and there's a big change in, it's a different group of folks. It was sort of the Sacramento-y type people who signed, who had the bill signing for AB 32. And this is a largely Latino state leadership in the legislature. And the change to incorporate environmental justice and climate justice and thinking about let's be intentional about how we meet our climate goals, not just set big goals and give it to the Air Resources Board to figure out how to do without a whole lot of public engagement, which I should say, I was at the Air Resources Board as staff when we were figuring out how to implement AB 32. We were around the table figuring out, do we do a carbon tax? Do we do cap and trade? Like what? Those were conversations that were really hard to answer, but there's a different engagement model and there's a different approach now, 10 years later. And that's, I think, that's a global trend that will continue to, California is always experimenting and being the leader nationally, and I think unfortunately we're going to have to skip sort of the national level here and continue to be sort of a sub-national leader in our own right at the global stage. And then SB 375 tied, as I'm sure you all know, tied land use, transportation, and housing to specific GHG reductions within Southern California. We have to meet targets that are for LA, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, Imperial County, and Ventura County. All together, we're tasked with meeting GHG reductions by reducing vehicles miles traveled. So that's sort of the connection with climate and SB 375 that I'm most directly a part of. And I'm also going to, that bullet right down here of MAP 21 having a greenhouse gas performance measure. NRDC and a lot of partners did a sort of groundbreaking comment drive to submit to Secretary Fox that we should essentially have what we do with SB 375 at the national scale. And that's still pending right now, and I think there's a lot more urgency to getting it done before January, so we're continuing to put on the pressure to basically take that approach of requiring state DOTs and metropolitan planning organizations to set targets and then let regions decide how they want to meet those vehicle miles traveled reduction targets. And I think shared mobility would be an answer for a lot of regions if they so chose. So it's another tool in the toolbox from that perspective. That's sort of the big picture of climate change and shared mobility and why NRDC is interested in this space. I'll skip this, but there's a little infographic about what AB 32 has done, but mostly from a transportation sector, this clean transportation side, decline in petroleum and electricity consumption. You don't really see that much about VMT progress on there because it really hasn't been a centerpiece because it isn't in terms of the chunks of the sectors reducing. But as we continue towards 2050, we have to address VMT if we're going to meet those goals. So I mentioned, and I'll get specific about the regional goal. The most recently adopted Sustainable Community Strategy for the Southern California Association of Governments said we're going to meet 18% vehicle miles traveled reduction per capita by 2035. And they're probably going to require or ask the state to only increase their reduction requirement to about 20%. That's what they think they can do sort of most aggressively. Metro has a long-range transportation plan. The city of LA has the Mobility 2035 plan, which I'm sure Marcel will address further. And we're working with LADOT on a shared mobility plan. Their Shared Use Mobility Center has done a county-wide shared mobility action plan saying getting 100,000 cars off the road. So there's a lot of plans out there that shared mobility, it's explicitly part of SCAG's regional STS. And then there's sort of varying levels of how explicit shared mobility is in all these different plans, which often, most of them have like a recurring timeline for which they must be adopted, but those are sort of the ways that we can plug this into existing governmental operations. So what do we know about shared mobility and climate change and VMT reduction? The next few slides are from Elliot Martin and Susan Shaheen up at Berkeley. The NRDC has been part of their work on this. This is on Car2Go. So they recently completed a study of free-floating car share. And I'm going to present this and a study on Zipcar, not necessarily to say that these are like the end-all be-all. There's a lot of other research already showing the connection between greenhouse gas reductions or not, and shared mobility. But I'm just going to present these as sort of frames of how the researchers are, the types of questions they're asking, and then I'm going to try to connect that to the types of documents that are out there in the world that practitioners need to kind of actualize things. So for getting into the car share, the Zipcar one, this is across, the data is collected from 5 North American cities. The only one in California was San Diego. Between 2 to 5% of members sold a vehicle due to car sharing across the study cities. 7 to 10 didn't acquire a vehicle due to Car2Go. And when you added up all the cars taken off the road, that was 28,000 vehicles. And of course, when you don't have those cars on the road, you don't need that parking demand. And then the average range, this wasn't that large of a raw number of vehicles sold. But the range of those vehicles that were sold, they were older cars. And that's, from an air quality perspective, really important because so many the newer cars are just have different standards to that they've been manufactured to. So that's a really important piece that you don't have to take a ton of them off the road to make an air quality impact. But by taking those older vehicles off, that really makes a dent. And then the entire sample of cars the average was 14.4 years. So that's a good number. So this chart, I will point out, so it kind of goes in order of lowest to highest percent reduction in GHG Calgary, to Washington, D.C. having down in that far right corner, 18% reduction in GHGs per household. So this is one thing I'll start pointing out, the metric being per household. The SCAG number that I referenced of VMT reduction is per capita. And then the range of vehicles removed per, that was not as large of a difference. This third column from the right, the range of vehicles removed per car share vehicle. There was sort of a wide range. And then the vehicle suppression numbers and vehicles sold Those sort of also not that wide of a range. Other key findings, BMT reduction ranges, those sort of summarize the big ones, and then total GHG. So this is a metric that I would like to sort of directly relate to what we're doing here in Southern California in terms of our sustainable community strategy, but it's a little different because it's per household. And also noting that there's land use differences between all these 5 cities, right? So Calgary, San Diego, Seattle, Vancouver, and DC all have different land use contexts and all have different transit options. So that's, I think, a factor that definitely plays a role when we're talking about shared mobility. You can't just plop a bike share system or a car-to-go system in a certain place and expect the same exact types of results if you consider the land use setting and the transit network setting. Zipcar, this study focused exclusively on university campuses and was national, had a sort of a wider range of cities, I'm going to refer to them as cities, but university campuses. And more than 40% of respondents said that they were less likely to buy a car in the next few years because of Zipcar. So again, that's that from that analytical frame of sort of car shedding. How likely are you to not buy a car anymore? Which I'll get back to from a modeling perspective of why that's a really important assumption that maybe we should be changing. And then moreover, 30% of students living on campus said they might have brought a car to campus if it had not been available. So that might is kind of important because it's hard to quantify for sure of whether somebody definitely would or would not have. And for reasons I'll get into in a minute, that certainty is an important thing to establish from a sort of a legal perspective. So what don't we know? Like I said, those are not the only 2 studies about shared mobility and their impact on VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. They're just sort of a representative of what's out there, and those are both done fairly recently. So what don't we know a lot? The first piece that I'm going to talk about, which we will shortly know, is NRDC is sponsoring a study with the same Berkeley researchers who did these first 2 studies that I referenced. Looking at the question of are Uber and Lyft helping or hurting the environment from a climate perspective. There's a lot of sort of anecdotal perspectives on that. So we said we should probably find out. And then once we started going into this, it was really hard to make sure that the data was being collected from a wide enough variety of cities, as I was mentioning, for land use and transit sort of comparison purposes. And questions of both the passengers and the drivers. So you have to collect data from both passengers and drivers, and then the actual practice of collecting data in both survey form and figuring out how to share data. Those are just some sort of previews of why it's difficult to do this kind of work with private companies. There's a variety of, especially 2 competing variety of companies. So that's just a little preview of how you do this kind of research. So that study will address both sides of that point, because I think a lot of people are initially thinking only from the passenger side, but especially, I mean, I'm sure you all know, if you've taken a TNC and asked your driver where they're from, not necessarily your next door neighbor, which is sort of how these companies have been pitching themselves. So we'll see sort of the answer on TNCs and climate impacts. But we've also already heard that a lot of people are sort of really excited about finding out from a local government perspective. The city of San Francisco was updating their transportation demand management ordinance, and they have this whole menu of options that developers can use for their transportation demand management programs. And we asked, well, what sort of shared mobility options are on that menu? And there are already developments that are voluntarily kind of giving their residents, for a residential building, here's $100 to use for your Clipper card or Uber. And the city wasn't quite ready to use that model because they hadn't felt like there was enough evidence out there to show that there was a direct connection, not even from sort of a climate perspective, from a transportation demand perspective. So they said, yeah, once your study's out, we can go back and revisit our menu. And they set it up specifically with in mind of being sort of nimble instead of having to go back to Planning Commission to update the menu. They wrote it in from a public policy perspective to be flexible enough to sort of have an administrative process to do that update instead of sort of politicizing every move of that transportation management program. So that's forthcoming. We're planning on releasing this in January. Final results will be, I think we're planning to go to a transportation research board, so any of you who have signed up to do that, which I encourage students to do if you haven't been before. Look for us there. And then because, like I said, I worked in government and specifically state government for a long while. The state government is kind of recognizing, oh, we think we want to talk about shared mobility from our climate goals. We're not really sure how. The states released this Vibrant Communities and Landscape Vision document that basically outlines recognition that they didn't quite include VMT reduction in sort of the most robust way before. The state has to do a scoping plan with AB 32 requires the Air Resources Board to put together a plan to meet targets. And that original plan really didn't talk about VMT, like I mentioned. So they're revising the scoping plan right now, and VMT reduction, the word is sort of out there that we have to think about that to get to our 2030 goals. And for the first time, I haven't even counted, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 agencies have signed on to a document saying, oh, we need to think about our communities, we need to think about walkability, bikeability, the connection between transportation and land use from a state perspective, which is really hard to do, and I'll tell you sort of very intimate conversations about why it's hard for the state to talk about land use is because there's very high sensitivity about local control. Land use is the exclusive function of local government. So it's very sensitive for the state to even put out guidance on land use. Local governments and the associations of local governments, very sensitive, generally don't like to be told what to do with land use. If you remember several months ago during legislative session, the governor wanted to put out a proposal on housing. It's called like sort of the by right housing proposal. Very adamant opposition from local governments about the proposal because it was essentially streamlining a process that primarily that are used as a venue for having local control, and they're very upset about that. And NDRC opposed that as well, but just getting into why it's very hard that this document came together and why all these different agencies came together and finally said, we have a vision and we know from the science that we have to meet VMT reduction. We have to have more explicit goals in VMT reduction besides what is in SB 375. And what can we do as a state? Because that's essentially regional action. What can the state do? And there was one line in there about shared mobility. It said, the state should explore ways to expand access to carshare, bikeshare, and rideshare services. So that's pretty broad and open, and to me, a big what don't we know moment right now is we don't know explicitly what the state's role should be in terms of the state's role for connecting to our climate goals. My initial read on what this should be is that from a funding perspective, the state has a big role in talking about funding and doling out the funding. They have a big role. They could play a very powerful role on pricing, and the state is already doing they're in the middle of collecting data. I think they already have over 1,000 participants in a VMT pricing or road charge pilot, essentially, which I think should have sort of be one of the gateways for talking about shared mobility, because we're talking about changing the way that people feel that they are paying for their mobility in a car. They might think about sharing it. So I'm really excited about, and there are a lot of other advocates and local governments as well thinking about what is the state's role in this space. I think it can kind of be more of an open door, because so far these conversations have been sort of from a local and NGO perspective with the state, from the adversarials, and you took away tools for us to implement SB 375 in our regional sustainable community strategies. We don't have enough funding to rethink our streets. We don't have enough money to redo our general plans. What do you want us to do? Essentially has been the question. So I'm really excited about the state thinking, okay, there's a state role here besides just SB 375 and regions writing plans and local government. And then what other types of information do we need to know from a state perspective? Is it an incentive program? We'll see for sure. I would love to find and see if you guys have thoughts on that. What should we prioritize knowing? There are connected goals and outcomes. So we can have, I talked about climate goals, I talked a little about mobility goals. Some of them have equity and equity components to them, and some of them don't. I would say most of them don't. And I know you guys have already had a lecture on equity and shared mobility, which I unfortunately did not get to review before this. So I'd love to hear feedback on this. But from a public policy perspective, you set a goal and then you figure out how to you say, if you want to play in my town, you need to meet X, Y, and Z. And if it's, I need you to data share with me, I need you to have a cash option for your program or your whatever you're operating within my jurisdiction. I need you to have multiple languages. I need you to have paired transit access type style. I need you to serve all communities. Those things don't just happen on accident. They have to be explicit. And I think there is definitely an environmental connection to that, but just making that pitch that it has to be explicit. And much like our environmental goals, we set them, and then people are allowed to play by those rules. Much more likely to get them than like sprinkling it on top somewhere else. SB 743, I haven't talked about that yet, but it's essentially another tool of implementing SB 375. It's sorry for all the numbers and SBs, but it's just how we're not very good at branding our work in urban planning and state policy. But SB 743 essentially changes the way that CEQA traffic impacts are assessed and analyzed. Instead of using level of service, moving cars through an intersection, it's the proposal right now is vehicle miles traveled being the analytical unit there. And it's mostly brought up questions about how do you do VMT reduction at a project scale. There's some clear things to do at project scale, but this impacts all kinds of, this is not just about residential development, or it's really about all kinds of development. So asking questions about project level shared mobility options. So if putting in a community scale bike share, if you're going to do a big tower and you're going to have 500 residents, then maybe there's some scale there for shared mobility, or is it, oh wait, I need sort of a different scale to think about shared mobility besides just at the project level. So that's SB 743, which we can get into more if people are interested. And why I also brought it up aside from that scale question is that there's a lot of attorneys involved in doing CEQA, and attorneys like certainty, and the clients like certainty. So just saying like, oh, I think we'll get VMT reduction, because there's really actually quite a lot of leeway from a lead agency perspective of what they want to require, but a lot of people don't use it because they're afraid of being sued, right? So they want to know certainty. They want to know this. There needs to be sort of this body of evidence that X mitigation approach, if it's a shared mobility related shared mitigation approach, would actually have an outcome. Because then, and especially from just a political standpoint, people don't want to see sort of shared bikes out of product development never being used and the neighbors complaining about more traffic. That would sort of be a local government's like worst nightmare, right? Because they have upset neighbors and they have lawsuits sitting at their door. So they need that body of evidence to be there. So it's important for us to just have more research on the connection between BMT, sort of car shedding, and BMT reduction in general. And this next bullet about CAPCOA, that is what it actually stands for, but it's the Association of Air Pollution Officers in California. They create essentially the document that all those attorneys use to decide whether a mitigation is appropriate or how large a mitigation needs to be taken. So they kind of need to be convinced because they write that quantification methodology. And if you ask the state, they say, well, that's guidance. It's not the end-all, be-all, but everybody sort of treats it that way. Are there other tools that we should be developing to capture shared mobility and its role in that could be used from sort of a lawyer's perspective, somebody writing a secret document on BMT reduction. And then, of course, parking. We've been going around to a lot of conferences this fall. Even from a transit perspective, not even talking about shared mobility, if a city wants to do rethink their parking around a transit area, if the city can be convinced to do that, if the developer wants to do that, we're finding that the lenders are really the ones who are not really quite sure about, I don't even know if this transit thing's going to change perspectives of the people going there, and I want the rents to be coming in. I'm really not quite sure that what is shared mobility, why would some people still want their car if they take Uber. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of connect the lending community and these concepts of shared mobility, and potentially if there is this car shedding and BMT reduction, do we need all this parking? But those are really happening two separate universes. And then I didn't go into this, but I'm sure somebody in your series will, or you'll read about it online, but there's this whole conversation happening about connected vehicle, autonomous vehicles, electric, and I'm sure Brian spent the whole day talking with a large group about this yesterday, so I'll leave Brian to share about that. But this sort of like there's this heaven and hell scenario. We're going to have electric cars that are all connected and safe and shared, so we don't need to kind of worry about the outcomes of shared mobility because everybody's going to have these electric cars that talk to each other and are shared. And then on the other end, we kind of get, if you don't have the electric side, you kind of just have cars going everywhere and congestion out of control, and cars there's higher BMT because cars are just circling because there's sort of low friction for them to do that. So there's, I forget which group, there's a really cute video online that Robin Chase's group has been showing that if you type in, what's her acronym, FAVES, F-A-V-E-S, the fleet of autonomous vehicles that are electric and shared. And Robin Chase into YouTube, you'll see that video that kind of goes, it's about 4 minutes.
Osmosis.
Osmosis, okay. Yeah, you can check that out and you'll see this sort of two different approaches. So that's a big conversation that's happening as well that I won't get into right now because like I said, I wanted to get into like the wonkiness of the different documents that are out there that shared mobility could potentially be part of if we have more answers. So those are sort of the pieces that I think we should be, from sort of a state of California land use perspective, that I would like to get into from this answering. Does shared mobility have a green path forward? So that's where I'd like to have our discussion. And I'm going to, there's my contact information if you want to get a hold of me, and I'll take clarifying questions right now. And
yeah, if there's anything you want to clarify now, otherwise we'll just move to the next talk so we can have discussion at the end. Any clarifying questions for? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great,
very much.
thank you.
Okay.
I think, so again, my name is Marcel. I work for LADOT right now. I've been in that role since January as the Chief Sustainability Officer. I think just to provide some context, we're going to get into talking about the role of government in terms of supporting bike sharing and car sharing and shared mobility in general. But I think to take a step back, I think it's important to, well, just for starters, I think when we look at the Department of Transportation, I think government tends to be, particularly departments, and specifically in the context of the last, I don't know, 8 years, having gone through a recession and losing staffing and being subject to the civil service hiring process, there's a lot of gaps, right? And then also looking at how mobility has just been revolutionized in the last several years with TNCs, with bikeshare, with technology, with smartphones, et cetera. I think that what we saw in 2008 when I first started working in the city was a department that wasn't nimble enough to respond to the new kind of market around shared mobility that was starting to emerge. And so what ended up happening is you started seeing kind of some of that come from the outside, right? And even within government, there's like an outside. There's the city council, who a lot of times in that position we found ourselves really being the instigators. And so that's how Zipcar first got piloted within the city. And so with a specific on-street program. Prior to that, there was kind of this, I forget what, there was Zipcar and there was another one. I don't know if anyone remembers the other car shop. Maybe Nextcar, but one of them Flexcar. Zipcar absorbed Flexcar. And so those were kind of the early makings of really car sharing within the city. There was a pilot that was launched many moons ago now that was really to create your first on-street parking car sharing pilot, which continues to exist in a pilot form in Hollywood, and then also around USC and UCLA. And that was, just to kind of tell you guys some history, that was really, once Zipcar absorbed their competitor in the Los Angeles market, they really kind of scaled back. And they really looked at, instead of like a shotgun approach, being very specific from a business model perspective about where they were going to deploy their vehicles. And they were really around high density, high transit nodes, which is why you have Hollywood, and then also around geographies that had kind of captive audiences, such as universities, right? So UCLA and USC. And so for a long time, car share within the city's role, the department was really much as an administrator of a program, right? So when you look at who the folks within the Department of Transportation doing the work were, there were folks who were concerned about parking. And what is the impact on meter revenue? Is there enough space here? Is it safe? Going and doing the striping signage. So it was very much a very operational perspective rather than we're the Department of Transportation and this is a great mobility option, right? And so I think you've started to see that definitely with this mayor and with this general manager, Salita Reynolds, there really has been a pivot for the department to look at how do we manage mobility rather than how do we manage vehicles and vehicle throughput. And so, so that's kind of where we're at right now. So how do we get there? One, I think political leadership, and then also understanding what was happening across both the country and across the country in terms of different mobility options. And I think as a department, what has helped to provide us with some of the ability to go after and implement some of these projects has been political leadership. And so a couple of things, and I think Kristen really kind of gave the macro view, right? There's all these plans, right? There's Mobility 2035, there's Shared Use Mobility Center's recent a report and strategic plan about removing 100,000 vehicles off the street. So there's these plans that exist. One of them that wasn't mentioned that is important within City Hall is the mayor's sustainability plan. And so when the mayor came on board, he named a deputy mayor of sustainability and put that position within, combined within the budget office, Mayor's Office of Budget and Innovation. And so actually not a deputy mayor, he's a director, maybe he's the chief sustainability officer, Matt Peterson, formerly from Global Green. He kind of led the ship there for several years. He used to build houses in New Orleans with Brad Pitt. He's super good looking, and he's great at being kind of this voice, right, and leveraging partnerships. And so under Matt's charismatic leadership, we were able to really just jam down this plan. It's a beautiful plan. He got TVA Chiat Day to give their services in terms of making a beautiful document with all this great stuff, right? And so what that does on the very high level is it empowers us as a department because it sets out goals for shared mobility, for VMT reduction per capita. And so it lays a framework for us that says, okay, hey, look, this is a directive from the mayor. The other thing that plan did, and in coordination and the ability to be within the budget office, is it went out and said, hey, well, we can't just have this unfunded mandate. We need to say that there's staffing and there's people out there that are going to carry this torch to implement this mayor's plan. And so as a result of that, they created deputy chief sustainability officer positions in a majority of the departments. I think it's a minimum of 18. We have 35, 36 departments across the city. And so what ended up happening is they created this deputy chief sustainability officer position within DOT. And so my role, so I transitioned from the mayor's office, I transitioned into that role, and Selena Reynolds, the general manager, used that opportunity to restructure their organization. There was a couple other things that had been kind of going on and thinking about it, but it really for the first time said, hey, we're going to have someone who's going to be primarily over shared mobility. And so whereas previously, bikeshare resided within the active transportation group, carshare was kind of reluctantly executed and operated within the parking group. And again, these are not because people don't believe in them. Some of it is resource driven. People are saying, hey, I have a mandate to go reform preferential parking districts. Now you want me to manage this zip car program? But of course, it's very hard to say no to the city council and to the mayor. And so you make it work and you squeeze it out. So again, the sustainability plan provided an infrastructure across the city where we could prioritize these mobility issues, shared mobility issues. And so now, as mentioned by Brian, I oversee not only bike share and car share, but which is really cool for me. I call it new mobility, and I like to look at it as very startup-y in that work. And on the other side of my shop, and by the way, I have one person on that. And then on the other side of my shop, I have the taxi group, which not only permits and enforces taxis, but they also enforce and permit ambulances, and then also driver permits for people who drive the Dash or other shuttle buses, for example. So I think the whole rationale, and I think it is because we're looking like taxi is shared mobility, right? And I think as we have a conversation around TNCs, there's this kind of struggle around how do we support taxis which have a clear benefit, right? You can hail on street, they have wheelchair accessibility, they're required under the franchise agreement with the city to serve low-income areas, and so that's I think that was kind of part of the mastermind around how do we continue to bring everything under one umbrella, and I think some of just the work that we're doing in terms of looking at mobility and a mobility management approach, and one of the things that we're going to be focusing on over the next several years is really looking at how are we getting our data house in order, because there's so much data that's collected throughout the city, or even within our department that's siloed. So the folks who are handling our traffic signals and ATSAC, they have a bunch of rich data, but it's kept within themselves, right? The active transportation team has data. The Vision Zero team has data. The taxi group has data. But there isn't really anyone kind of connecting it and speaking the same language in terms of what are we trying to solve holistically around mobility, and what are the priorities of the council, the mayor, et cetera. So that's kind of one piece. To kind of dig down a little bit more into bike share and car share, which I think are the two main programs that we actually have it either on the ground and are looking at expansion. So bikeshare, who here knows what bikeshare is? Okay. So the city of LA has a partnership with Metro to implement bikeshare. Everybody knows that. I feel like everyone here is a bikeshare expert, so can't wait to get to Q&A because you guys are going to teach me some stuff. But, so I think one of the key pieces I want to just footnote, because you guys may be looking at going to other cities and working for bikeshare companies or as consultants. I think one of the things that it's important to know about the Los Angeles model is that it's a partnership with Metro. So I believe it's the first bikeshare system in the country that is run through a regional transportation agency, right? And so what is that? So, and that didn't happen by chance. If any of you remember we're in LA under the previous administration, or we're even monitoring bikeshare back then, there was an attempt towards the end of the previous administration, and there was definitely a press conference to announce bikeshare coming to Los Angeles. And that was done through, and that was a city forward initiative. It's like the city of Los Angeles and the mayor are going to support bikeshare coming to LA, and we're going to stand up here with this bikeshare company X, and it's going to happen. Well, it didn't happen, right? And some of that is because one staff person with no funding and no financial commitment or partnership with a company is not going to make a bikeshare system, right? And so, so when we started, and I was fortunate enough to be with Councilmember Garcetti through the transition to the mayor's office, one of the first things that we did, and I think it was kind of a perfect storm, because we were able to recruit and maintain the previous administration's main transportation person. And so collectively, we were able to hit the ground running when the mayor took office. And I think early on, we met with the city of Chicago and with Gabe Klein and Scott Kubley, who had implemented a bikeshare in Washington, D.C. and in Chicago. And so they kind of gave us an education on what it really took to launch bikeshare. And so one of the things that we did as coming back is we worked with the mayor to put together a motion that really launched Metro as the lead agency for bikeshare. And so what did that mean? That mean you had an agency who had resources, you had an agency who had not just resources in funding, but resources in technical staff. You had, and I think importantly, when we kind of look at the user experience, and I think this is the whole key to, one of the keys to shared mobility, is you had kind of a vision in terms of looking at, wow, it would be great to use your tap card to get on a bus or get on a metro and get off of it, and then use that same tap card to jump on a bike share, right? It's kind of creating the seamless experience, the seamless experience, right? And so that, I think, is one of the things that we're working on with Metro, and we continue to work on the Metro. So a little bit about the specifics of our program and how the partnership works. It's a 50-50 capital split on for bike share. So the bikes, the stations themselves, and then it's a 65-35 split for operations and maintenance, with 65% of that coming from the city. And so again, there was another thing, right? So now the city doesn't have to take on this whole burden, and we actually can, through an RFP process, we're able to select a bike share operator that that we pay them like fee for service, right? And so they manage the bike share program for them. We work with them, with Metro being the lead holder on that contract. And so where we're at, we launched in July. We're, I think, at about 80,000 trips total for the system. It's a little bit under, it hovers between, clarifying question?
Yeah, will the funding structure be the same for all the new cities that actually go to Pasadena?
Yeah, so when the Metro board adopted the rules and regs for the program, it wasn't focused on the city of LA. We were just the first in line. I mean, obviously, we were driving a lot of the discussion, and we were ready to be the first pilot city. And so, but it was done in a structure that was broad. It was for everyone, right? Specifically, and I think these are one of the questions that we're looking at in terms of how do we expand our system. And so The model that we used to fund it, our capital piece, was looking at existing funding sources that we had. So converting Metro Call for projects, money that had been allocated for another reason. Because again, we had great ideas coming up. I think we had a bike share Metro Call project that we were awarded at some point to do like a bike station around Staples Center. So we had all these, we've had great ideas, but I think they were, anyone can apply for a Metro Call project, right? And so you don't have to actually be able to implement it. I think they try to make sure that your application is going to be implemented, but at certain times, and again, as the industry has changed so rapidly, we were fortunate to be able to use some money that was already existing, and we were also able to use express lane toll revenue. They have a grant program from the toll revenue that's generated from the 110 and the 10. But what that is, that whole process though has been, let's go after money, let's see if we get the money, and then let's go ahead and enroll the pilot. Now we're kind of in this position where if we want to be more aggressive from the city's perspective, do we wait for grant funding, or do we use existing funding that we have, right? And so that's a transportation finance question that we have to ask ourselves in terms of what our policies and priorities are, right? Otherwise, we can continue to go down this model of where can we apply for grant funding, where does it make sense to expand CarShare, but those cycles take time, right? Right now, though, we do have our hands full. We're looking at expanding to Venice Beach. Well, so again, downtown, 65 stations, around 700 bikes, 80,000 trips to date. We're hovering between, we're hovering definitely under one ride per bike per day. I think it's in between like 0.8 and 1. And so, what does that mean? People are like, oh, are you failing? Are you guys succeeding? I'm like, it's a pilot. Downtown is different than New York. It's all going to be dependent on how we expand. But we are curious about this, and we're looking at our rate structure. We will be looking at the rate structure, and again, this is something that's approved by the board. We're also looking at this question of equity. And so we're partnering with the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition and Multicultural Communities for Mobility to look at doing surveying within the pilot area to understand what are the barriers for ridership for folks. Whether it's, those things that Kristen talked about in terms of equity, like, are they unbanked? Is it a cost issue? Does it connect to where they need to go, right? Like, is it different if, the bike share station is sited in front of a coffee shop in the arts district versus in the fashion district where there's going to be working class folks, and what are the trip patterns and stuff like that. So those are things that we're looking at in terms of looking at how we expand and how we improve the system within downtown. But at the same time, we're looking at expanding into Venice, right? And so Councilmember Bonin, who sits on the Metro board and has been an early adopter and supporter of transportation mobility in general. He chairs the City Council's Transportation Committee. He wants it, right? He understands the West Side is, has a lot of traffic, a lot of congestion. He understands the ability of shared mobility to help alleviate some of that, some of those issues. And so what we're looking at is rolling out a 10 to 15 bike share station system on Venice. And then with that, there's also interest in other cities on the West Side in looking at expansion. I will say there is, I'm sure you guys know, there is another bike share system that's owned and operated by the City of Santa Monica. We've worked with City of Santa Monica to co-locate some of their stations within Venice, and that was through the leadership of Councilmember Bonin to understand, again, from a perspective, users don't know the difference, right? Some may not. I'm sure you all do. But, for someone who's like, I just want to ride a bike, right? And I want to get to point A to point B for my trip. And so those are some of the things that we're piloting. We supported bringing those stations into Venice. We're going to be putting our stations and our systems into Venice. And that's going to be a discussion about how do we work collaboratively with other partner cities where there may be different systems to create an improved customer experience, right? So that's bike share. On the carshare side, as I mentioned, carshare has been around in the city for many years. I think probably at least a decade, right? Different models have come and gone. I think in the region, you also recently saw one-way car sharing come and go, point to point, which was operated by Car2Go in the South Bay. The city of LA and the city council has directed my department to report back with actually creating a framework for point-to-point car sharing. Everybody know what point-to-point car sharing is? Okay, good. And so that's one of the mandates. At the same time, we have the Zipcar pilot, which is like the longest pilot. Well, probably not, right? Probably not, but it's been out there. And so again, that for the Hollywood area means about 20, I believe 20 on-street parking spaces for Zipcars. Now, does anyone use Zipcar here? How many Zipcars are in the county? Do you guys know? On average? I think it's like over 300, 350. So they've proceeded, right? Like they have, the ones that they have several in downtown. They're working with private operators, private parking lots to look at their fleet. Another company that's actually just entered the company, and I think it goes to, the interesting point that Kristen put up about Ford. Maven has just launched in the OEMs. Maven has just launched in Los Angeles as well, in downtown, and they're a car sharing system that is it GM? I think it's operated by GM, and so they are, and it's like, oh, let me go get a Cadillac with like leather interiors because like all their cars are like, it's easier for them, right? Because they're the OEM as well. So it's this kind of this, what you're starting to see is all of these, the OEMs really getting into the space of shared, of just mobility services all around, which has been really interesting. So one of the pilots that I'm working on right now that is we've been spending a lot of time on is electric vehicle car sharing within the city of Los Angeles. So on the transportation side, I had my experience with car sharing, and I think one of the challenges that we were never able to really address effectively is how do we get car sharing companies to service low-income communities. And I think one of the things that you're going to that we need to do better as a government is really know how to kind of leverage our position to meet the policy outcomes that we want, right, for equity. And because what the response, like these businesses are not doing it just to be good guys, right? They're not, I think Zipcar has a really good overall, like, our job is to reduce single occupancy vehicle, and so they have a large mission, but they're not specific of like, my job is to help mobility in low-income communities, right? They have a business model that they need to apply, that they can, they have a formula to. And so low-income communities and equity issues, when, the obstacles might not just be about fare, it might not just be about being unbanked, right? Someone just might be afraid of the technology, right? So I think unpacking all of those actual obstacles to gaining access to low-income disadvantaged communities is a real challenge that requires locally based solutions, right? And so one of the reasons, so just think about how complicated that is, right? And so, but we said, nah, it's too easy. So what we decided to do is, like, let's also throw electric vehicle charging infrastructure and cars into the mix. And let's do that as a pilot, right? And so, bless Matt Peterson's team and the sustainability team, because they really led the effort on working with CARB and going and putting together an application. But for me, when I was in the mayor's office on the transportation side, I'm thinking about Measure M, I'm thinking about, is the purple line on the schedule? And then lo and behold, it's like, hey, by the way, mayor's office, transportation team, and DOT, we're doing this EV car share pilot. Do you guys support it? And we need your help. And so, I think it's been great because I think this is somewhere where we're actually pushing the envelope. And no one really knows how to do it, right? I think the largest electric vehicle car sharing fleet that exists is in Paris. There's one in Indianapolis. And those are pilots that that are like 10-year deals, 12-year deals. There's a huge infrastructure investment, and I don't even think they're talking about equity, right? They're just, here's the system, right? So that's kind of where we're at. We're right now looking at a 3-year pilot to launch a carshare electric vehicle carshare system that we've partnered with local nonprofits. So Trust South LA, Kiwa, and Salef. I don't know the acronyms, you guys got them. And they are all locally based organizations and a nonprofit that are committed to equity, right, in their communities. And so we have them as a partner in the grant, helping to develop an street ambassador program, and working in conjunction with this operator that we hope to finalize our contract with, by the end of the year. And so, but no one knows, right? Like, what is success, right? I think success for us so far has been understanding what are all these obstacles, right? To EV infrastructure, which is, for the most part, has like a 10-year life cycle, right? So are we going to commit to doing EV infrastructure in the public right of way, right? And then there are other questions that come to me, and I'm on the transportation side. It's like, well, should the city just own its own infrastructure? Should we make a commitment to just doing EV infrastructure across the city? What does that look like? Is there enough political support? Like, should we run our own car sharing system, right? Like, we run our own dash system, but we contract out with operators, right? Metro runs the bike share system, but they contract out to an operator. So what are those business models that the city could adopt, particularly when, like, with right now, like, all these things are independent. Bike share, car share, or bike share. The great thing is branded Metro and it's run by Metro. The back end doesn't really fully work yet, but we're moving that way. The same thing with car sharing. Like, how do we brand car sharing, right? Is it something that's like mini dash or something, or a neighborhood dash, or and how do you create kind of a seamless user experience? I think that's kind of the next big piece that we're working on. How much time do I have? Because I can wrap up and we can go to questions.
Yeah, like 2 minutes.
So the other piece that kind of intersects here that could really kind of be a conduit for all of these discussions are mobility hubs. Everybody heard of mobility hubs? Do you guys know what they are? I mean, I don't. I mean, I feel like it's a rebranded, first mile, last mile TOD, right? Like, but there was some visionary thinking that happened 7 years ago in our department that applied for a federal JARC grant, Job Access Reverse Commute, and around mobility hubs. And this was when bikeshare was something that people did in Paris, right? This is when carshare was kind of works. There's a little bit in the city, and we got like $7-8 million to do mobility hubs. So everyone's looking at us as the experts, but just until now we're writing the RFP to release, right? And now we have bikeshare, right? We know what carshare looks like, and so we're really moving forward and trying to understand. And it's, from my perspective, it needs to be grounded in user experience and how are people connecting, and I don't think that's something traditionally that has been done, right? If you're looking at Metro staff and the way they're organized, you have the planners, and then you have the construction team, and then you have like the marketing and branding team, and everyone has a goal and a mission, right? And so when you're talking about a construction team, if it wasn't included in the scope, why are they going to spend additional time to do wayfinding or to really kind of think about the user experience as people come out of Metro stops, as they're waiting for the bus, et cetera, et cetera. And so to a certain extent, some of that stuff has been value engineered out, and it's like, oh, well, that's something that the city should handle. And so guess what? We are trying to handle it, and we're now acting as kind of like a disruptor, like kind of going back at Metro and saying, hey, these are the things that you should start considering and how we should start looking at what mobility hubs are, which is integrating all these services, right? And then like also the different types of scales, right? Like Union Station is like the massive like mobility hub, right? And like there is a great experience there, right? There you can get a pretzel, you can play piano, you can. There's like a bunch of people standing around who can help guide you, right? So how do you take that experience and boil it down to different pieces? And so I think really measure impacts. 75% of City of LA voters approved it, you know, and there are a lot of things along with major capital projects, but there are line items in there for programs and sub-programs. And one of them is around mobility hubs and first mile, last mile. And so there is how that actually ends up developing in terms of if it's another call for projects opportunity where people come after mobility hubs money, or whether or not that's a program that Metro has to take on around their you know, their stations is yet to be seen. But I think there is going to continue to be a role, and that is going to be and just kind of bringing it back to the integration. You know, Metro's going to be spending $1 million the next fiscal year to get the integration on bikeshare right with the tap, right? And that's going to open up a whole another thing, right? Like maybe it's free transfers on bikeshare, right? And so like, but only until we can get that done will we start being able to play around with that. Here's another one. How do we get carshare on there? Metro has this great group called the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, which I chuckle at, but I love them. But they've been able to be disruptors within the agency as well. And so they're pushing, you know, pilots with TNCs, and how do they do integration on TNC payment. And so I think there's a lot. I think just kind of the big piece too is I can focus so much on like the bikeshare, carshare piece, and just on the mobility hubs, but I think it's understanding kind of the larger landscape and being relentlessly aggressive to implement projects because as Kristen said, and being in Chicago at the Shared Use Mobility Conference a couple weeks ago, there was a lunchtime panel that was all OEMs. And everyone on that panel was someone talking about integrated mobility services, right? And so that is, I think, going to be we're going to find ourselves in a situation when the TNCs came. When the TNCs, like the government was ill-equipped to kind of prepare with another disruption in mobility. And I think that's one of the things that we have to aggressively be ramping ourselves up with. So.
Okay. All right. We have 15 minutes for questions. Fire away for either one. I think we'll have them stand up there and sit.
Any questions? I think you had a clarifying question.
What's an OEM?
What is an OEM?
It's the people who make cars are engine manufactured.
Okay.
Yeah. Car companies.
Honda, Ford.
Question.
For the electrical vehicle car share idea, has there been conversation with like electrical utility companies to be able to equip the infrastructure to support that? You know.
So yeah.
And we're gonna repeat. So your question was, is with the electric vehicle car share pilot, what's the role of the utility?
So the city of Los Angeles owns its own utility, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and they've been engaged. Actually, because all these engineers love to wake up early, I started my day at 7:30 today with a bunch of engineers going through the final workflow of what it would look like to install the infrastructure. And so they're definitely involved. They're actually providing a subsidy as part of the rebate program to install on-street charging stations.
So I've been like really into plans lately. We probably worked on a lot of them, but like specifically the LA Urban Mobility Plan. I'm like really interested in like the process of how that was done, and how successful you think that would be. And I'm like really interested in how I guess the city got like a fellow to do most of the work on that, and like how that worked, like in cohesion with the department.
you want me to take it first time?
Go for it.
Yeah, so the answer to how the city got a fellow to do it is the foundation. So it was the Rockefeller Foundation's funding fellows across the country. And that's actually a piece that I'm learning a lot about right now is like in government, I didn't really realize that there's these foundations who have a lot of interest in these issues. So the Rockefeller Foundation funded Ashley Hand for the year.
Well, I think you're talking about the Mobility 2035. Or are you talking about
No,
the
Ashley's
Transportation
strategy.
Technology Study? Okay.
Yeah, so that's how that was funded. And then what was the first part of your question? So I can repeat that for the online
I
folks.
guess sort of like your outlook on like how that plan is going to be like implemented.
I can
Like the success.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
For the online folks, how is that urban mobility strategy for LA going to be implemented?
So this is where like Selena Reynolds would put her this awesome slide of like the robots are coming and have people just mixing a martini in a car while the kid plays checkers with his sister, and so that's kind of like the far piece of the plan. Like how do we prepare for an autonomous future? But I think a lot of it is also, so again, Ashley Hand, she came in and she used to be, I think, Chief Innovation Officer for like the city of Kansas City.
Yeah.
Kansas City, and she's also an architect by trade. She had spent some time working with, I think, AECOM, and she's super sharp and I think really understands systems really well. And so understanding where the department is in relative to managing mobility and preparing itself for these kind of continuous disruptions in mobility that are on the horizon, with one of them being autonomous vehicles. And so what I think is really good about the report is that it sets out a bunch of pilots that should be pursued that can help kind of check the boxes on a lot of different things. But I think, and I've been spending a lot of time on this piece specifically, and you heard me talk about it, is one of Ashley's recommendations was to establish a strong data foundation. And so as there's a lot of work that we have to do as a department to kind of get up to speed on how we're managing data and using it to solve our policy goals, right? So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is around transportation happiness. That gives me a little bit of heartburn because as I'm thinking about a budget submittal to the city council and the mayor, making a strong argument for transportation happiness is not really something I think is going to fly a lot. I think people would most likely say, I want to work on improving traffic in my neighborhood or increasing safety and so. But I think it's a catch-all, right? It's the things as planners that we know are really critically important to getting people to switch modes, to have a good experience, to feel safe on transit or trusting getting onto an autonomous vehicle. And I think the big bookend of that piece is really preparing for an autonomous future and starting to engage. And so, again, this is moving super fast. We've been participating in calls with cities across the state and then also across the country. And there are very few cities that are actually knowing what to do about how to develop regulations for autonomous vehicles. And then you have also a tension between the national side and the state side. And I think what we've learned locally is we want to have a voice. And so we've been submitting comments already that talk about shared mobility. So we'd say, hey, great, autonomous vehicles, our comment, we want to make sure that, because this can go either way. We want to make sure that you guys are considering shared mobility. We want to be able to have access to data. How is our law enforcement going to be wrapped into this? And so we're making noise. I think the autonomous vehicle, the OEMs, they're not public about a preferred path. I think they're saying they're focused on the technology. I think that at least public facing, right? They're saying, we don't have any public position on it. We're just supporting developing the technology. So, Herbie?
Okay. I want to ask you about speed.
I was really struck by that moment where you said, we got this giant mobility hub grant 7 years ago when the world looked like this. And I think we know that government is slow, sometimes for good reasons, and that there's an imperative for government to go faster to keep up with this stuff, and that's kind of the work that you guys are doing. But I want to like unpack what are the trade-offs? Like when we go faster, what do we have to trade off? And for example, one of the things might be people who have pension jobs. You know, to hire someone to get them to work on a thing right now, it's often kind of a short-term appointment. So that's just an example to kind of like spark your thinking. But I'm wondering if we can unpack more, like, what do we trade off to have a faster government?
Can I start on that? So Herbie's asking what's the question about speed of how fast should we do this, and there's a reason government is slow. Contracts. So my dad was the purchasing manager for the city of Riverside, and like they were talking about doing a bike share thing, and he was also the risk manager, so he's like even more wanting to be slow about things. So I kind of saw from this person who's not a shared mobility person, or he writes contracts for a city, and there's a reason contract rules are in place, and there's fairness and transparency questions. So that, I mean, there, to your point, like there's a reason, but there's also, and I think going back to that question about that urban mobility strategy is, you could trade out the phrase transportation happiness for like education happiness, or like all these different public issues that is sort of like do government the right way, that. And we should have access to resources so we can have data scientists in-house in government, so we can have functional government at the local level. So there's definitely like resource questions of like, how do we do tax reform like in a big way that that empowers governments to do their job better. But there's, I don't know, it's tough, and contracts for me are like a big space. Like purchasing is a really tough space to change, but like, do you want to change it that much?
Well, so I think we have a responsibility as government to maintain the interests of the public, you know, in terms of the decisions we're making, the contracts we're signing, how those contracts are procured, you know, who gets access to that. And so I think that's a very important role. I don't think, like, in terms of quickness, like, I don't think that those things should ever be set aside, right? I think those are very important and they're very key. But I think that some of it is about prioritization, right? So if you don't have the resources to do a pilot or a project, then it's not going to get done, and then that will extend out for time. I mean, just looking at the bike share example, right? When the previous, there weren't the necessary infrastructure in place from a policy perspective, from a staffing perspective, from a business model perspective, to support a viable bike sharing system the first time the city attempted it, right? And it appeared to be fast. Hey, the public wants bike share, go. And there was an announcement, and there wasn't enough work to provide the resources and the infrastructure to make that project successful, right? And so, so I think it's, I think had that, and so here was an unintended benefit of it, right? The unintended benefit is we had time to actually really sit down and think about what a good bike share system and model in the city of Los Angeles and in the county would look like, and we were able to benefit from not being first, right? And so I think the other piece too that I would say is this whole notion of coming into government and trying to institutionalize more of the that it's okay to fail, right? Like quick to fail type of pilot mentality. And that's something that's not even been within that hasn't been spearheaded by DOT, that's been spearheaded by the mayor's office, right? And so previously Rick Cole was over the mayor's office of budget and innovation and has really led a lot of development of that infrastructure for the city to look at how we're actually supporting process improvement, innovation, and really understanding how we can make it easier for city employees to spearhead and participate in that process, right? And so I don't want it to seem that, you know, at all costs we have to go fast, but I think there are systems that we can amend within the city about how we do things. And I think it starts with leadership at the top, you know, and getting that support from the electeds, but then also having management in place that can really kind of carry that out.
We have time for one more question.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on how important and difficult it is to integrate all these different mobility services for Mobility Hub, because like in the Bay Area they have one card and you can take the bus to BART to Muni, and you're more likely to do that because it's just one card. But here you would pay for Santa Monica Breeze bikeshare with your credit card, and then use your tap card for the train, and then use your key fob to go to the zip card, and how important it is to just have one type of card to integrate all those services, and how hard it is because it's different companies that don't want to
Sure.
share.
Well, some of it is, so here I think it really starts with Metro. I mean, I think Metro's tap card is the equivalent of the Clipper card. And so I think and that tap card has actually tried to tackle that initially, but it's only specifically around transit companies. So I don't know if you know the numbers on that, Brian, but how many of the regional transportation agencies?
70 different agencies
70
are
different
already
agencies.
connected to it. So it's pretty connected from a transit
So
perspective.
it is, from a transit perspective, there is, you know, like you can ride a Dash with a tap card. You can ride
Foothill Transit.
Foothill Transit with a tap card. You're now able to use a tap card on Metro Bike, but I think it is still a challenge, right? Because when you look at other things, right, like when you look at MetroLink, or when you look at getting car share companies, or getting Uber and Lyft, right? I think that's kind of the pot of gold. Like, how do you get a full integrated experience? I think it starts with Metro to a certain extent, and understanding what their architecture is for that card, and who is able to, is it an open system or is it a closed system? And then also, what is the value for a private company to join that, right? And I mean, those are the key pieces. I know that there are other countries that are way more successful with that kind of platform, and Transport for London, Singapore, who have those kind of models. I mean, I think it's just this localism, you know, that this is how we're going to do it here, and you know, we spent this much money on this exact model for this card and this technology, and I think it's actually having to take a step back and really understand what are we trying to do with this card, and how do we get there through the technology. And there are some third-party applications who are trying to do it. Xerox did an app called Go LA where they're looking at trying to integrate payment, but it requires, and they've been able to successfully do it with Lyft, but Uber has not been interested in doing it as well. And so I think there's a bunch of different conversations happening, but I don't have the right answer, you know, or there's not one answer.
Okay, let's thank Kristen and Marcel.